Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
I don't remember the exact moment when admiration turned into inconvenience. Maybe it was the night she got her promotion and introduced me to her new team as the one who keeps the lights on at home. They laughed, all of them, smiling young faces in their crisp suits, and I smiled too, because that's what I did. I smiled. I nodded. I stood back and let her shine. I wasn't always just the support act. When we first started dating, she said I was the most grounded person she'd ever met. Said she loved how I didn't chase money or status, just stability. I worked construction back then, rough hands, early mornings, late shifts. I came home dirty and tired, but proud. She was still in school, stressed out all the time, working nights at a bakery and pulling double shifts on weekends. I used to bring her dinner in the middle of her study sessions, rub her back while she cried over statistics homework. She called me her rock. That's what she used to say. Her rock. And I was. For years. I paid her student loans off over time, covered the down payment on our first house, let her start her business while I took on weekend contracts. When her mother got sick, I moved her into our spare room and helped carry her to the bathroom when her legs wouldn't cooperate anymore. I didn't sleep for almost 3 weeks that winter. And when her mom passed, I was the one who handled the funeral arrangements, while she disappeared into grief and wine. None of it ever felt like a burden back then. It felt like love. But something changed after she hit a certain level of success. She wasn't the stressed-out grad student anymore. She was a district manager, then an executive director, and eventually a speaker at conferences I couldn't even afford to attend. The gap between us widened, slowly, almost invisibly. We stopped meeting in the middle and started rotating around her orbit. She began taking phone calls at dinner. Then she stopped coming to dinner altogether. Some nights she didn't come home at all, claiming work dinners, networking, growth opportunities. I never questioned her. Not once. I figured if I worked hard enough to hold everything else steady, she'd eventually see I was still the man she fell in love with. I didn't expect the distance to turn into disgust, but that's what it felt like the night I heard her say it. She was in the kitchen, glass of wine in hand, talking to someone on speakerphone. I had just come in from the garage, my work boots still on, dust clinging to my arms from a long day under the sun. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I swear. I just froze when I heard my name. She laughed. Oh, come on. He's not a partner. He's just a workhorse to ride. The words knocked the air out of my lungs. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. Just stood there by the doorframe while she went on. Yeah, he pays the bills, keeps the house running, picks up my dry cleaning. What else do you need in a support animal? Support animal. She laughed again. Her friend on the phone laughed louder. I couldn't move. Couldn't think. My heart was pounding so loud I thought the floor would collapse beneath me. After a few more minutes, she hung up, walked out of the kitchen, and brushed past me on the stairs, didn't even flinch. Didn't even notice I was standing there. I guess that made 2 of us. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until the sun started to rise, staring at the calluses on my hands, the tiny pink scar on my arm from welding a frame for her office shelves last year. All I could hear was her voice, looping in my head like a curse. He's just a workhorse to ride. I thought about confronting her right then and there, but something in me stopped short. Not fear, something else. Something colder. I didn't want an apology. I didn't want her to backpedal. I wanted the truth. And not the rehearsed version she'd serve up with tears and guilt. So I waited. The next morning, I was up before her. Made coffee. Fed the dog. Packed her favorite protein bars in her purse like I always did. When she finally came down, looking distracted, scrolling through emails, she didn't even notice how still I was. You okay? She asked, barely glancing at me. I smiled and nodded. Then I watched her walk out the door, wondering how long it would take for her to realize that I wasn't going to keep pulling the same cart forever. Let her think I was the workhorse. She was about to learn what happens when the mule drops the load. 2 weeks later, the divorce papers arrived. They weren't handed to me in person, no conversation, no attempt at resolution. Just a sharp knock on the door early in the morning and a manila envelope with my full name printed on top. The delivery guy couldn't even meet my eyes when I signed for it. He must have known what it was. Everyone does. That kind of paper always has a certain weight to it, like it's been dipped in venom. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker and stared at it for an hour while the dog barked at birds outside. When I finally peeled it open, I already knew what I was going to find. Emotional abandonment. That was the claim. She told the court I had become distant, that I made her feel invisible, that I was no longer present in the marriage. No mention of the overtime, the injuries, the things I gave up. Just a cold, clinical description of my supposed emotional failings. I read it 3 times, then set it back on the counter, neatly folded. No yelling, no broken plates. Just a strange, hollow quiet. Like standing in the center of your own funeral. She came home that night acting like nothing had changed. Tossed her keys on the counter, made a call on speaker while reheating leftovers, laughing with someone about her new beginning. I still didn't say anything. I didn't ask who she was talking to, or if the wine she was pouring was celebratory. I just watched. Because now I needed to know more. I started digging, not out of revenge, but because I had to understand what had really happened to the woman I once called mine. And it didn't take long before the cracks widened into sinkholes. Her lawyer, Brandon Ellis, wasn't just her legal counsel. He was also her former colleague, someone she used to work closely with. Or so she'd said months ago when she first brought up getting legal advice, just in case we needed clarity. I remember brushing that off at the time. I trusted her. But when I went back through my bank records, I noticed something strange. 3 months before she even mentioned the word divorce, she had withdrawn a large sum of cash. Not for a vacation. Not for bills. It had gone to a private account in her name only, something we never did, not once in our marriage. Then I found the receipts for a hotel stay. 2 nights. Spa suite. The booking name? Brandon Ellis. That's when I felt it. Not rage. Not betrayal. Purpose. This wasn't just a divorce. It was an ambush. She hadn't simply fallen out of love. She'd orchestrated an exit, down to the language in the papers and the timing of her emotional distress. I wasn't just being left, I was being repositioned. She was rewriting the narrative. That's when I hired Will Mendez. He's not the type of lawyer who wears shiny cufflinks or flirts with reporters outside courtrooms. Will's a war veteran. Short, broad, straightforward. He read the papers once, looked at me, and said, "They're trying to paint you as obsolete." He told me not to worry about revenge. If you're telling the truth, we don't need to twist the knife. We just need to show the blade. I like that. We spent the next month building the case quietly. I gave him everything, medical reports from my injury last year, bank statements showing I paid for her certification program, emails she'd sent me asking for help while planning her mother's memorial, which I'd paid for in full. But what hit the hardest were the photos. I'd never thought much of them before. Just random shots she'd taken of me over the years, sleeping on the couch after a shift, covered in sawdust in the garage, kneeling on the floor beside her mother's bed. They were never posed. Just caught in passing. I had hundreds of them. Turns out, those images told a different story than the one she was trying to sell. One night, while I was sorting through files, I got a text from our mutual friend Erin. We hadn't spoken much since the split, but she was always more my friend than hers, even if she played it neutral. The message just said, "You didn't hear this from me, but she's rehearsing her testimony. Brandon's feeding her lines about how broken you are. Be ready." I stared at that message for a long time. She was preparing to lie under oath, to fabricate a version of me that never existed. And Brandon, the man who once sat at our dinner table, was helping her do it. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was erasure. She wasn't trying to end the marriage. She was trying to end the memory of me. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror that night, took off my shirt. The scar on my right shoulder from falling off a ladder while fixing our leaking roof. The gnarled one across my ribs from the night I slipped while unloading her office furniture. The burn on my forearm from the time I didn't realize the welder was still hot because I hadn't slept in 2 days. Every one of those marks had a story, and I was going to tell them. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with the kind of truth no one could unsee once it was shown. Let her tell the courtroom I was just a workhorse. I was going to show them what that actually meant. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not just the temperature, the entire atmosphere. Clinical. Distant. It didn't feel like the place where the story of my life was being dissected. It felt like a room designed to forget people. Gray walls. Old carpet. The faint smell of coffee and toner ink hanging in the air. She sat across from me in a navy blue suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Her hair was done. Nails perfect. Voice calm. You'd never guess she once cried in my arms for 2 hours because she was scared she'd never make it in her career. Or that I used to wake up early just to scrape ice off her windshield so she wouldn't be late. Now she couldn't even look me in the eye. Brandon, her lawyer, her partner, as far as I was concerned, stood when the judge asked for the opening statements. He moved with the confidence of a man who'd already won. "Your Honor," he began, "this is a case of emotional abandonment." Of a woman left behind in her marriage, neglected and unsupported by a husband who checked out long before these proceedings began. I watched him pace, planting seeds. Mrs. Halstead, he continued, gesturing to her, tried everything. Marriage counseling, conversations, patience. But the respondent, he looked at me like I was a stain on the carpet, retreated further into emotional isolation. She has been alone in every way that matters for years. The judge nodded slightly, took notes. My lawyer, Will, stayed silent, hands folded in front of him, waiting. Then came the witnesses. First was her friend Tasha. She took the stand and talked about how often my wife cried on the phone, how I was always too tired, disinterested, unsupportive. She used words like apathetic and passive-aggressive. She even claimed I'd once left my wife at a company dinner because I was too insecure to be seen with her colleagues. That one stung. I left because I had the flu and didn't want to embarrass her by throwing up in front of her boss. But Tasha made it sound like I abandoned her in a parking lot. The judge nodded again, scribbled something down. Then came the photos. My wife had prepared a slideshow, carefully selected images of her at family events alone, on vacations I couldn't take time off for, smiling in group shots without me. This is what my marriage looked like, she told the judge. Me, always alone. I said nothing. My lawyer said nothing, because we were waiting. Then she took the stand herself. I sat there and listened as she dismantled the last 10 years of my life with a tone so polished it could have been written by a speechwriter. She said I was good at pretending, that I smiled at parties but emotionally withdrew in private. She even said I once told her she wasn't worth the effort. That never happened. Not once. But the lie was so smoothly delivered, I had to blink just to keep my focus. Then Brandon handed her a tissue. Theatrics. But effective. When it was our turn, Will stood calmly. No objections, he said. But we'd like the opportunity to submit evidence of our own. The judge allowed it. Will turned to me and nodded. It was time. I stood slowly. My palms were sweating, but my breathing was steady. I reached up, undid the first button of my shirt. A quiet rustle in the room. Some of the spectators leaned forward. Brandon raised an eyebrow, unsure what was happening. I removed the shirt, folded it once, set it on the table. Then I turned slightly and showed the courtroom my right shoulder. The ragged scar. Then the long one across my ribs. Then the burn mark on my forearm. This, I said, voice even, is from the winter I fell off the roof fixing a leak over our bedroom. I was up there for 3 hours because the snow wouldn't stop. I didn't tell her how bad it was because her mom had just gotten worse and she didn't need another thing to worry about. I turned to show the back of my arm. This one's from unloading the heavy beams for her home office remodel. She asked for a rustic ceiling. I told her I could do it myself to save us the money. Ended up needing 7 stitches. Silence. Even the judge's pin had stopped moving. I have photos, I added, if you need corroboration. Dates. Medical bills. Everything. I looked straight at my wife. She didn't look smug anymore. Just, still. I didn't check out, I said. I checked in every day. At 5 a.m. for work. At 8 p.m. for repairs. At midnight, when her mom had panic attacks. I just didn't talk about it because I thought that's what men were supposed to do. Carry the load. Without complaining. I paused. But apparently that made me invisible. The judge finally cleared his throat. Mr. Halstead. Just one more thing, I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out the binder. Inside were all the letters I'd written to her during our marriage. Anniversary notes. Apologies after fights. Handwritten cards she'd once kept in a box. I slid them forward. She said I never expressed emotion. That I withdrew. These say otherwise. Will added, we also have photos of him supporting her at 5 separate events, despite his claims of being too busy with physical recovery. His employer is willing to testify about time-off requests to accommodate her family emergencies. The judge leaned back. Brandon shifted uncomfortably in his seat. And my wife? She looked at me with something I hadn't seen on her face in a long time. Shame. The room stayed quiet for a long time. Then the judge spoke. I'd like a recess. No gavel slam. No dramatic exit. Just the soft creak of his chair and the weight of truth hanging in the air. I slipped my shirt back on and sat down, heart steady. Let her have her polished words. I had something better. Scars don't lie. When we returned from recess, the room felt different. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Not the kind that sparks arguments or chaos. This was quieter, heavier, like everyone was waiting for something they knew they weren't ready to witness. My wife didn't look at me as she walked back in. She adjusted her blazer, kept her eyes on her phone. Brandon whispered something to her, probably instructions on how to spin this in closing. But her posture had changed. Her confidence, so polished just an hour ago, was thinning at the edges. The judge called us back to order and asked if there was any further evidence we wished to submit. Well, stood. Yes, Your Honor. We request permission for a character statement, and for Mr. Halstead to present additional contextual evidence, nonverbal, but demonstrative. There was a pause. Proceed. I didn't stand this time to perform. I stood because I needed them to understand something no document could show. I stepped forward quietly and opened a small black folder. Inside were 3 photographs. I handed the first to the clerk, who brought it to the judge. This, I said, is my wife at her graduation. I worked 3 jobs that semester to pay for the final tuition shortfall. We couldn't afford a photographer, so I borrowed a friend's camera and took this shot myself. The second photo. This is her mother's hospital room. I built the custom railing on the bed after she fell the first time trying to get to the bathroom. The nurse said it saved her life during her final collapse. And the third. This was taken last year, during our anniversary. She was smiling here because I surprised her with a trip she said we couldn't afford. I sold my truck to make it happen. The same truck I used to drive 3 hours a day to work during her first 2 years in business. The judge glanced at each one carefully. The room was so silent I could hear the whir of the ceiling fan. I turned back to my wife. I'm not angry, I said quietly. I'm not here to punish you. I just want the truth to matter. She still didn't look up, so I spoke to the room instead. I never made vows expecting perfection. I made them expecting partnership. When things got hard, I didn't walk away. I walked harder. I gave everything. And when I ran out of everything, I gave more. I took a breath, steady and slow. And even then, I was never enough for her. That's when the judge spoke. Mrs. Halstead, would you like to respond? She stood abruptly. Your Honor, with respect, these photos, these speeches, are designed to create an emotional narrative. But this isn't about scars or effort. This is about neglect. About emotional absence. The judge leaned forward. Emotional absence is a serious claim. But so is emotional erasure. She faltered. He's putting on a performance. No, the judge said, voice firm now. A performance is rehearsed. What I saw earlier wasn't rehearsed. It was lived. Brandon stood, preparing to object, but the judge cut him off. And you, Mr. Ellis, before we continue, I'd like to address a matter brought to my attention during the recess. I was informed by opposing counsel that you may have a personal history with your client that predates this case. Is that correct? The silence was instant. My wife's eye shot toward him. Brandon didn't answer right away. Your Honor, any such history is irrelevant to the facts. It's relevant to your credibility, the judge snapped, and to your impartiality. You should have disclosed any prior personal relationship. Brandon sat down, face drained of color. I didn't smile. I didn't move. I just looked at my wife, who now sat stunned, one hand covering her mouth as the cracks finally reached her. The judge continued. Mrs. Halstead, your case is built around abandonment. But what I see is a pattern of dismissal, disregard, and possibly manipulation. He turned to me. Mr. Halstead, you have endured what appears to be emotional neglect under the guise of ambition. Your willingness to absorb hardship without acknowledgement, while not a legal argument, is an act that carries moral weight in this courtroom. Then he looked back at her. I've seen enough. She didn't speak. Not a word. Just sat there like someone waiting for a bus that wasn't coming. I'll render my full judgment tomorrow, the judge said. But let it be clear. This court recognizes not only financial contribution, but the intangible sacrifices that hold a marriage together. The pain that doesn't show up on spreadsheets. The work that doesn't make headlines. The gavel came down. Everyone started to move. Papers shuffled. Chairs squeaked. But I stayed still, until I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was the bailiff. He leaned in. You didn't say much, he said under his breath. But you didn't have to. That was the realest thing I've ever seen in here. I gave him a small nod and walked out, not with pride, not with triumph. Just with the quiet satisfaction of a man who finally let the truth speak for itself. Let her call me a workhorse. I carried the whole damn thing longer than anyone ever saw, and I still made it to the end standing. The next morning, I arrived early. The courtroom was nearly empty. Just me, Will, a few clerks organizing papers at the front, and the echo of footsteps on polished tile. I sat in the same place, second row from the front, same posture, same folded hands. But I felt different. Not because I expected a win, but because I already had one. She walked in 10 minutes late. Brandon wasn't with her. Whether he was removed or she fired him, I didn't care. Her new attorney looked confused and underprepared, flipping through documents like he'd been briefed 5 minutes ago. She didn't even look at me. Not once. The woman who once couldn't start a day without touching my hand now sat across from me like a stranger on a train. The judge came in exactly at 9 o'clock. No preamble. No long speech. Just the sound of his voice cutting clean through the tension. This court has reviewed all materials and testimony submitted, and I have made my decision. I didn't move. In divorce proceedings, the court is tasked with discerning not just the material realities of a marriage, but the invisible weight both parties carried. While Mrs. Halstead cited emotional abandonment, the court finds her claims were inconsistent with the documented behavior, correspondence, and first-hand accounts provided. He turned a page. What emerged instead is a pattern of one-sided sacrifice. The respondent, he looked at me, shouldered the physical, financial, and emotional labor of the marriage while receiving little affirmation or recognition. A murmur from the back of the room. Someone scribbling in a notepad. In light of this, I am awarding Mr. Halstead the majority of joint assets, including the marital home. Spousal support is denied. Furthermore, the petitioner's failure to disclose a personal relationship with prior counsel raises questions of good faith during this process, and has been noted in the court record. I heard her inhale sharply, but she didn't argue. Not here. Not now. Court is adjourned. The gavel hit. That was it. No parade. No music. Just the slow rustling of people rising from their seats, some looking at me, some avoiding eye contact entirely. Will patted my shoulder as we stood. You did it, he said quietly. No, I replied, buttoning my jacket. I just showed up. The truth did the rest. As we left, I felt her eyes on me. Maybe she wanted to speak. Maybe she didn't. But whatever she had to say, it wasn't mine to carry anymore. I had carried enough. Outside, the morning sun was warm. Not blinding, just warm. The way it gets in late spring when winter's weight is finally behind you. I drove home in silence, windows down. No music. No destination beyond my own front door. The house was quiet when I walked in. I went to the living room, dropped the file folder on the coffee table, and just stood there. The floor creaked beneath my feet like it always did, like it had during all those nights I came home long after she was asleep, or out, or somewhere else entirely. Same house, different man. I went to the closet and pulled out the wooden box she'd left behind. Inside were the letters I'd written her over the years. The notes, the small gifts, the memories. I didn't burn them. I didn't shred them. I simply put them in the attic. Not because I wanted to keep them, but because even bad history is still history. Later that week, I received a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Erin. She'd been quiet throughout the whole ordeal. She was never the kind to take sides. But now, her message was short. Simple. I was in the back row that day. I saw everything. Just wanted you to know, you were never invisible. It hit harder than I expected, because that was all I'd ever wanted. Not praise, not recognition, just to be seen, to be understood. That night, I took off my shirt again. Not for a courtroom, not for evidence, just in front of the bathroom mirror. I traced the old scars, now faded and quiet, and smiled. Not because they were gone, but because they were mine. Every inch of damage told a story I no longer had to defend. They were no longer signs of being used. They were signs of what I survived. She once called me a workhorse, and maybe I was. But the thing about workhorses? They don't break. They endure. And when the weight is finally lifted, they remember what it feels like to run.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.